Developers are switching from Claude Code to Codex, not just experimenting with it. Some claim they're moving the majority of their hardest coding work to OpenAI's agent. And the obvious explanation is that Codex must now be the smarter model. But after reading developer reports across Reddit, Hacker News, and both companies' documentation, I don't think that's the real reason. Because Claude Code is more capable than ever. It has parallel agents, work trees, cloud sessions, plugins, remote control. And Anthropic says Opus 5 leads several major coding evaluations. So why are developers still leaving? Because this competition is no longer just about which model writes the best code. It's about which agent produces the most completed, approvable work before it wastes your time, loses the objective, or hits a limit. And that changes the entire comparison. In this video, I'll show you the 4 forces pushing developers toward Codex, the major area where Claude still wins, and a simple test that will tell you which one is actually better for your work. This isn't based on one viral tweet. A post in the Claude Code subreddit titled "The Grass is Greener on the Other Side" has nearly 700 upvotes. The author stayed loyal for most of a year, watched his usage shrink, and finally switched. His words: same $200 plan, different provider. And now he can't exceed his weekly limit even when he tries. He also said the new model was solving issues that Claude had dragged its feet on for days. And in the same community, a principal level engineer with 14 years of experience put 100 hours into Claude Code, 20 into Codex, and wrote up the difference. Over 2,000 developers have voted it. We'll come back to that one. On Hacker News, the takes are calmer. Code quality is often close, but Codex follows detailed requirements and structured workflows more consistently. None of these posts is a scientific benchmark. Reddit attracts frustrated users. Subreddits have obvious biases, and coding results depend heavily on the repository, the prompt, and the developer. But when the same patterns appear across different communities, they become useful signals. And the first signal is about what happens after the initial prompt. Modern developers are no longer asking agents to write isolated functions. They're giving them objectives. Investigate this bug. Understand the surrounding architecture. Fix the root cause. Update the tests. Run the application. And continue until the result works. That requires more than code generation. The agent has to preserve the objective across dozens of small decisions. And this is where Codex users repeatedly describe a difference. They call it methodical. They say it searches more deeply before editing, sticks more closely to the approved plan, and continues through implementation without constantly changing direction. Remember that 100-hour comparison? The engineer found that Claude would semi-frequently leave a task half done. Migrating 8 test suites to a new pattern, it converted most of them and quietly left a few on the old one. He also caught it rewriting tests to match what it thought the goal was and ignoring his project instructions file. Codex, in his words, would stop, pull back, and rework its own code to be cleaner without being asked. And he never once saw it ignore the instructions file. These are individual experiences, but they reveal what developers now value. The best agent is not necessarily the one that produces the most impressive first response. It's the one that still remembers the actual goal after opening the 20th file. That makes Codex attractive for migrations, large refactors, debugging, and repository-wide changes. But reliability alone does not explain why people are canceling subscriptions. The biggest reason is hidden inside a much more boring complaint. The most important battle may not be intelligence. It may be completed work per subscription. In one Reddit discussion, a Claude user described hitting his limit partway through a refactor. The 100-hour engineer's whole Codex experiment started because his Claude limits ran out on a Friday morning. That creates a bigger problem than simply waiting for a reset. The project is now sitting in an incomplete state. A new session, or a different agent, has to inspect the changes, reconstruct the plan, identify what remains, and verify work it did not perform. It's like a contractor walking off the job with your bathroom half tiled. The next contractor doesn't start tiling. They start by billing you to inspect everything the last one did. The interruption creates a context tax, and that tax is paid in developer time. The switcher from earlier put a number on it. On Codex, he works all day and doesn't touch 10% of his usage, on the same $200 tier, where Claude had him rationing every prompt. That is not a controlled measurement, and Codex has usage complaints of its own. Parallel agents can consume allowance rapidly. Limits change. Heavy users can exhaust virtually any plan. But developers do not experience tokens per month as an abstract number. They experience whether the agent finishes before it stops. Imagine two agents. Agent A writes slightly better code, but requires 6 interventions and reaches its limit during testing. Agent B writes slightly less elegant code, but completes the change, passes the tests, and gives you a reviewable diff. Which one made you more productive? For many developers, the answer has shifted from Agent A to Agent B. This is the real tipping point. Codex did not need to beat Claude on every benchmark. It needed to produce enough completed, approvable work that Claude's interruptions were no longer worth tolerating. And once developers began optimizing for completed work instead of impressive conversations, the ideal interface changed too. If this breakdown is useful, hit subscribe because it's free. And if you want to back the work, hit join here or the supporter button on Facebook. Now, force number 3. Claude Code became popular as a conversation-first coding tool. You opened the terminal, discussed a problem, watched Claude explore, corrected its assumptions, and developed the solution together. Codex increasingly feels completion first. You define the outcome, provide the constraints, and delegate the task. The agent investigates, modifies files, runs commands, tests its work, and reports back. The 100-hour engineer described exactly this shift. At this point, he said, I'm just firing it off and coming back when it's done, because it's demonstrated competence. The desktop workflow makes this mental model particularly clear. Multiple tasks can exist in separate threads. Their changes can be isolated. You can inspect their diffs without constantly switching between terminal windows. One agent can investigate an authentication bug. Another can update the test suite. A third can review a proposed migration. You stop acting like the person pair programming every line and start acting like the person assigning and reviewing engineering work. For developers who prefer control through specifications and acceptance criteria, this can feel transformative. But for developers who think by talking through a problem, the exact same behavior can feel rigid and overly literal. That explains why one person calls Codex disciplined while another calls it frustrating. They may not be disagreeing about capability. They may be using two completely different definitions of a good collaborator. But there is one feature comparison that almost every Codex versus Claude video still gets wrong. Parallel agents are no longer a unique Codex advantage. Claude Code now supports sub-agents, background agents, coordinated agent teams, dynamic workflows, and isolated Git worktrees. Its desktop app supports parallel sessions and long-running cloud execution. A local session can be continued remotely, and Claude can work through plugins, connectors, scheduled tasks, hooks, and reusable skills. So the argument that Codex supports multiple agents while Claude does not is outdated. Both products are becoming agent command centers. The actual difference is how naturally the model uses those capabilities, how much configuration the workflow requires, and how predictable the final result feels. This is why feature checklists are becoming less useful. On paper, the products increasingly look similar. In practice, two agents with similar tools can behave completely differently. And there is still one category where many Codex users admit Claude has the advantage. The most consistent criticism of Codex is front-end design. Even developers who prefer Codex for back-end systems, architecture, and refactoring often say Claude produces better interfaces from broad creative instructions. Ask Codex to implement a supplied Figma design or match a reference image, and it may perform very well. Ask it to simply make this dashboard beautiful, and users complain about generic cards, oversized elements, weak spacing, and questionable visual hierarchy. Claude is often better at filling in those unstated creative decisions. It may also feel more natural when the requirements are incomplete and the developer wants the agent to help discover the solution. Claude's hooks and plugin ecosystem remain valuable for developers who have spent months building specialized workflows. And Anthropic says its newest models improve coding, verification, long horizon work, and visual output. So, this is not evidence that Claude Code is dying. In fact, one of the smartest workflows described in these communities is to use both tools. Claude develops the product direction or visual design. Codex handles the implementation, tests, and difficult refactors. Then each agent reviews the other's work. That sounds inefficient until you realize that disagreement between two capable models can reveal mistakes that either model would miss alone. So, if Claude remains this capable, why does the switching narrative feel so powerful? Because Codex did not have to become universally better. It only had to cross the substitution threshold. When Claude Code was clearly ahead, developers tolerated its limits, interruptions, and occasional architectural mistakes because the alternatives were worse. But once Codex became close or better for a developer's specific workload, the calculation changed. Every unfinished task became a reason to test Codex. Every rate limit became a reason to test Codex. And every problem Codex solved after Claude failed became an experience powerful enough to change someone's workflow. That is why this moment is bigger than a normal model release. Developers are not simply switching from Claude to Codex. They are switching from conversation-first coding to completion-first coding. They're optimizing for completed work, validated results, and reviewable diffs, not which chatbot feels smartest during the first 5 minutes. And that brings us to the only comparison that actually matters. If you want to know which agent is better, do not trust the loudest Reddit post. And don't trust this video either. Choose 3 real tasks from your own repository. First, a bug with a known root cause. Second, a feature with objective acceptance criteria. Third, a messy architectural problem where the right answer is not obvious. Give both agents the same starting point, permissions, and definition of done. Then measure 5 things. Did the project compile? Did the tests pass? Did the agent preserve the existing architecture? How many times did you have to intervene? And would you approve the final diff? That test will tell you more than 100 benchmarks because it measures compatibility with your codebase and your working style. Claude Code did not suddenly become useless. Codex simply became capable enough that Claude is no longer the automatic answer. And the winner will keep changing. So don't build your identity around one model. Build a workflow that lets the best agent win. Real talk. 90% of you watching haven't subscribed. On Facebook, subscribe is the supporter button. That is what keeps the lights on here. On YouTube, it's free and it tells the algorithm to send you more. Subscribe to support us. I turned that test into a printable kit. The 3-task protocol, the 5-metric scorecard for both agents, the cross-review prompt that makes each model check the other's work, and a switch or stay decision matrix for your exact workload. Comment the word finish, one word, and I'll send it to you free. And if you're staying on Claude Code, my beginner guide takes you from 0 to shipping. It's linked below with the rest of the guides. Follow on Instagram for the daily drops. See you in the next one.